What makes a person capable of evil? Why do seemingly good, ordinary people transform into perpetrators of harm under certain circumstances? This is one of the most unsettling questions in the realm of human psychology. Philip Zimbardo, a renowned psychologist, tackled this topic in his groundbreaking work, The Lucifer Effect. Drawing inspiration from the biblical story of Lucifer, God's beloved angel who became the embodiment of evil, Zimbardo unveils the hidden forces that can push even the kindest individuals into darkness. From the infamous Stanford prison experiment to everyday examples of moral lapses, this exploration challenges the simplistic notion of good people versus bad people. Instead, it delves into how authority, systems, and environments can shape human behavior, revealing the uncomfortable truth. Under the right circumstances, anyone can become a monster. However, Zimbardo also emphasizes the hope that lies in understanding these forces. By confronting them, we can nurture heroism, defy systemic evil, and create a society grounded in compassion and justice. Hey, have you ever thought about what makes a person truly capable of evil? I mean, we all like to believe we're inherently good, right? But what if I told you that, under the right conditions, even the kindest, most ordinary people could do unimaginable things? It sounds chilling, doesn't it? But this isn't just some philosophical debate. It's a reality explored in the groundbreaking work The Lucifer Effect by psychologist Philip Zimbardo. Inspired by the biblical story of Lucifer, God's favorite angel who fell from grace to become the embodiment of evil, Zimbardo shows us that the line between good and evil isn't as clear as we think. Today, I'm going to take you on a journey through some of the darkest corners of human behavior, from the infamous Stanford prison experiment to moments in history that reveal how systems and environments can shape who we become. But don't worry, it's not all doom and gloom. We'll also talk about how we can resist these forces and rise above them to be heroes in our own lives. Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you'll see just how powerful self-awareness and moral courage can be in shaping a better world. Let's dive in. Hey, have you ever stopped to wonder what really makes a person capable of doing something evil? I mean, most of us like to think we're the good guys, right? We help others when we can, we follow the rules, and we don't see ourselves as the kind of people who could hurt someone or cause harm. But here's the unsettling truth. Sometimes it's not about who you are at your core. It's about the situation you are in, the pressures around you, and the systems you're part of. Let me put it this way. Imagine you're in a position of power, where people have to listen to you no matter what. At first, you might think, no way, I'd never abuse that. But history and psychology show us a different story. It turns out that under certain conditions, even the most ordinary, kind-hearted person can do things they never thought they were capable of. And that's what we're talking about today. This isn't just about philosophy or theory. It's real. There's a scientific basis for why good people sometimes do bad things. And if you've ever wondered, could I be one of those people? Could I fall into that trap? Then stick with me, because the answer might surprise you. Now, let's get into the heart of what Philip Zimbardo explored in his groundbreaking work, The Lucifer Effect. This book dives into one of the most uncomfortable truths about human nature, that the line between good and evil isn't as clear as we'd like to think. It's inspired by the story of Lucifer, the angel who was once God's most trusted, most beloved, but who fell from grace and became the ultimate symbol of evil. But here's the thing. Zimbardo doesn't just use this story as a dramatic backdrop. He uses it as a mirror, something to make us reflect on ourselves. The truth is, just like Lucifer, all of us have the potential to cross that line under the right, or should I say, wrong, circumstances. It's not about being born evil. It's about the systems we're part of, the roles we play, and the pressures we face. Think about it. How often do we hear people say, "I was just following orders," or "It's not my fault, that's just how the system works"? That's exactly what Zimbardo challenges us to confront. He shows us that evil isn't just some rare thing that a few bad apples bring into the world. No, sometimes the problem is the barrel itself, the environment, the culture, the authority structures that shape how we behave. When we talk about good versus evil, we're not just talking about villains in movies or criminals in the news. We're talking about something that's much closer to home, something that could be inside any of us if the right or wrong conditions are in place. And honestly, that's what makes this so fascinating, and yes, a little terrifying. Because the question isn't just, are there bad people out there? The real question is, what would I do if I found myself in a situation like that? And let me tell you, Zimbardo's work is going to make you think about that in ways you've never considered before. All right, let me paint a picture for you. Imagine waking up one day thinking everything is normal, and then suddenly finding yourself in a situation where you're forced to make choices you never thought you'd face. That's exactly the kind of scenario Zimbardo's research dives into. Those moments when people, often without realizing it, cross the line from being good, ordinary individuals to doing things they'd never imagined themselves capable of. And here's the kicker. These moments don't happen in isolation. They're shaped by the systems and environments we live in. Think about it. How many times have you seen someone justify their actions by saying, "Well, everyone else was doing it," or "That's just how things are done around here"? It's this idea of going along with the flow, of conforming to what's expected, that can turn small, seemingly harmless decisions into massive, life-altering mistakes. Zimbardo's work makes it clear that the environments we create, whether it's in a school, a workplace, or even a family, are more powerful than we often realize. They have this subtle, almost invisible ability to influence our behavior. And, let's be honest, it's a little scary to think that under the right conditions, even the best of us could be swept up in something bigger than ourselves, something we might regret later. But here's what I find fascinating. Zimbardo doesn't stop at just exposing these forces. He pushes us to think critically about them. He challenges us to ask the tough questions like, what kind of systems am I part of? And how are they shaping the way I think and act? And most importantly, how can I make sure I don't fall into those traps? Because, let's face it, understanding how these forces work isn't just about avoiding harm. It's about learning how to stand up and make better choices when it really matters. Now, let's talk about why Zimbardo's work is so relevant today. You see, we live in a world where the lines between good and evil often feel blurred. Whether it's in politics, the workplace, or even online, we're constantly seeing situations where people justify harmful behavior because it's part of the system, or that's just how things are. Sound familiar? Take a moment to think about social media. It's a place where people can hide behind screens, free from accountability, and say things they'd never dare say in person. That anonymity. It's one of the same factors Zimbardo identified in environments that enable cruelty. Suddenly, it's not about you as a person. It's about the role you're playing in a larger system, whether you realize it or not. And let's not forget about authority figures. Think about how many scandals we've seen where people in positions of power abused their authority, and others just went along with it because, well, they didn't feel they had a choice. Zimbardo's research shows us that this isn't just a coincidence. It's a pattern. It's how systems are designed to operate when they're unchecked. But here's what makes this so fascinating, and honestly, a bit terrifying. It's not just about the people in power. It's about all of us. It's about how we react when we're part of a system that's flawed, or when we find ourselves in a situation where the rules seem to push us in the wrong direction. The big takeaway? Evil isn't some abstract force out there in the world. It's something that starts small, almost imperceptible, and grows when we're not paying attention. It's in those tiny decisions, choosing to look the other way, staying silent when you should speak up, or going along with something just because everyone else is doing it. And this is where Zimbardo's work hits hard. It's not just a warning, it's a wake-up call. Because once you realize how these forces work, you're not just a bystander anymore. You have the power to recognize them, resist them, and even dismantle them. And honestly, that's where the hope lies. Because if we understand how evil operates, we also understand how to stop it in its tracks. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Zimbardo's work doesn't just leave us stuck with the uncomfortable truth that anyone could become part of something evil. It pushes us to think deeper, to question what it is about certain situations or systems that makes them so powerful. And here's the key takeaway. The problem isn't just a few bad apples ruining the bunch. Nope. The real issue is the barrel itself, the environment, the system that shapes how everyone in it behaves. Think about it for a second. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like you had to go along with something, even though it didn't sit right with you? Maybe it was at work, where the culture encouraged cutting corners to meet deadlines. Or maybe it was a social setting where everyone was gossiping, and you didn't want to be the one to speak up and say, "Hey, this doesn't feel right." These aren't just random moments. They're part of a larger pattern Zimbardo identified. When systems are designed poorly, when they lack accountability, encourage conformity, or create an us versus them mentality, they can bring out the worst in people. And here's the scary part. You often don't even realize it's happening. It's like a slow, subtle shift where what once seemed unthinkable becomes normal. Take the Stanford prison experiment, for example. The guards didn't start out as cruel. They were just normal college students. But the system they were placed in, the uniforms, the power dynamic, the lack of oversight, it all created a perfect storm. It didn't excuse their behavior, but it explained how it happened. And this isn't just something that happens in experiments. We see it all around us. In workplaces where toxic cultures push people to act unethically. In schools where bullying is normalized because no one steps in to stop it. In global events where entire societies have justified atrocities by dehumanizing others. The real eye-opener here is that it's not about blaming individuals, it's about looking at the bigger picture. Because if the system is broken, even the best intentions can go wrong. And that's where the power of Zimbardo's research lies. It's not just about pointing fingers, it's about understanding the mechanisms at play so we can start fixing them. So, the big question we need to ask ourselves isn't just, am I a good person? It's, what kind of systems am I part of, and how are they influencing me? Because the truth is, recognizing those influences is the first step to breaking free from them and creating something better in their place. Now, let's shift gears and talk about something hopeful. Because as heavy as this topic might seem, Zimbardo didn't just uncover how good people can turn bad. He also explored how we can resist these forces, rise above them, and even become heroes in our own lives. And let me tell you, this is where things get really inspiring. First, let's get one thing straight. Being a hero doesn't mean you need to wear a cape or have superpowers. In fact, most heroes are just ordinary people who make extraordinary choices. They're the ones who step up when it's easier to stay silent. They're the ones who question authority when everyone else just goes along with it. And guess what? That means heroism is something every single one of us is capable of. But here's the catch. Heroism doesn't just happen out of nowhere. It takes something called moral courage. That's the ability to act according to your principles, even when it's risky, even when it's uncomfortable, and even when you feel like you're standing alone. And let's be real, that's not always easy. It's scary to speak up when you're afraid of being judged or punished. It's hard to go against the grain when everyone else is moving in the same direction. Zimbardo talks about how self-awareness is the first step in developing this kind of courage. You have to be able to step back and recognize the forces at play, the peer pressure, the authority figures, the systems that might be nudging you toward decisions you wouldn't normally make. Once you see those forces for what they are, you can start making choices that align with your values, instead of just going along with the crowd. And let me tell you, history is full of examples of people who did exactly that. Think about whistleblowers who risk their careers to expose corruption. Think about activists who stand up against injustice, even when it means putting their own safety on the line. These are people who didn't just resist the pull of evil, they actively worked to dismantle it. Here's the best part. Heroism isn't just about dramatic, world-changing acts. It's also about the small, everyday moments where you choose to do the right thing, even when it's hard. Maybe it's standing up for someone who's being treated unfairly. Maybe it's admitting a mistake when it would be easier to cover it up. Or maybe it's just refusing to participate in something that goes against your values, even if it means you're the odd one out. The point is, heroism isn't some unattainable ideal. It's a practice, it's a mindset, and it's something we can all cultivate, one choice at a time. Zimbardo calls this the heroic imagination, the ability to see yourself as someone who can make a difference, no matter how small. And honestly, isn't that the kind of world we all want to live in? A world where more people are willing to step up, speak out, and take a stand when it really matters? So, the next time you're faced with a tough choice, ask yourself, what would a hero do? Because the truth is, we all have the potential to be that hero. Not just for ourselves, but for the people and the world around us. All right. Now, let's dig a little deeper into the psychology behind resisting evil, because it's not just about standing up to bad systems or saying no to authority. It's also about confronting something much closer to home, ourselves. This is where Carl Jung's concept of the shadow comes in, and let me tell you, it's both fascinating and a little unnerving. Jung believed that every single one of us has a darker side, a part of ourselves we don't like to acknowledge. It's where we hide all the thoughts, feelings, and impulses we consider unacceptable. And guess what? That shadow isn't going anywhere. It's part of being human. Now, before you get too worried, let me explain why this matters. The shadow isn't something to fear. It's something to understand. Jung argued that if we don't confront our shadow, it controls us from the background. Think about it like this. If you don't acknowledge your capacity for anger, greed or selfishness. Those feelings might sneak up on you when you least expect it, influencing your actions in ways you don't fully realize. So, how does this connect to resisting evil? Well, Zimbardo's research shows us that under the right circumstances, people can justify terrible actions because they don't believe they're capable of doing harm. They see themselves as good people, and that self-image blinds them to their own potential for wrongdoing. But here's the thing. When you confront your shadow, when you acknowledge that you, like everyone else, have the capacity for both good and evil, you gain power over it. You start to recognize the situations and emotions that might push you toward decisions you'd regret. And that awareness, it's like armor. It helps you stay grounded, even when you're in environments designed to shake you. Let me give you an example. Imagine someone in a high-pressure job where the culture rewards cutting corners. If they've never acknowledged their own capacity for greed or ambition, they might justify unethical behavior by saying, "It's not a big deal," or "Everyone else is doing it." But someone who's confronted their shadow might recognize that little voice inside, the one whispering, "Just go along with it," and choose to act differently. Jung believed that true self-awareness comes from facing this shadow head-on. It's not about feeling guilty or ashamed. It's about understanding that your darker impulses don't define you. They're just part of the whole picture. When you accept that, you're better equipped to make conscious, ethical choices, even in challenging situations. And let's not forget, this isn't just about resisting evil. It's also about embracing the good. When you confront your shadow, you're not just acknowledging the bad stuff. You're also uncovering your capacity for courage, compassion, and resilience. It's like clearing away the fog so you can see who you truly are, flaws and all. So, the next time you're tempted to think, "I could never do something like that," take a moment to reflect. It's not about doubting your goodness. It's about deepening your understanding of yourself. Because the more self-aware you are, the better prepared you'll be to make the right choice when it really counts. And that's the kind of strength the world needs more of, don't you think? Now, let's talk about something that's deeply wired into all of us, our need to belong. Humans are social creatures. We crave connection, community, and acceptance. And while that's a beautiful thing, it also comes with a catch. This need to belong can sometimes lead us down the wrong path. You've probably heard of groupthink. It's what happens when people in a group prioritize harmony and agreement over critical thinking. And let me tell you, it's more common than you might think. Groupthink shows up in boardrooms, classrooms, social circles, and even entire nations. It's that feeling of, well, everyone else is doing it, so it must be right. The problem is, when we let the group's opinion override our own judgment, we stop thinking for ourselves. And that's where things get dangerous. History is full of examples of people following the crowd, even when the crowd was clearly heading in the wrong direction. Think about mass movements where harmful ideologies took over, or even smaller-scale situations like bullying, where bystanders stay silent because they don't want to stand out. Why does this happen? Well, part of it is fear. We don't want to be the odd one out, the person who challenges the status quo. There's a survival instinct in all of us that says, stay with the group, it's safer. And honestly, in some situations, that's true. But in others, that instinct can lead us to ignore our own values, to go along with things we know deep down are wrong. Let's break it down a bit more. When you're in a group, there's this psychological phenomenon called diffusion of responsibility. It's the idea that when everyone is responsible, no one feels responsible. So, if something harmful is happening, people might think, well, someone else will step in. But when everyone thinks that way, no one acts, and the harm continues. Here's the thing, though. Resisting groupthink doesn't mean you have to isolate yourself or reject every group you're part of. It means having the courage to question, to think critically, and to trust your own judgment, even when it's uncomfortable. It's about being willing to be the one who says, hey, is this really the right thing to do? And let me tell you, that takes guts. Standing up to a group isn't easy, but it's one of the most powerful things you can do, not just for yourself, but for the people around you. Because when one person speaks up, it creates a ripple effect. It gives others permission to question, to think, to act. Think about movements for social change. They often start with just one or two people saying, "This isn't right." Those individuals didn't let their need to belong override their sense of justice. They challenged the group, and in doing so, they inspired others to do the same. So, what's the takeaway here? It's this. Belonging is important, but it shouldn't come at the cost of your integrity. The next time you're in a situation where the group is heading in a direction that doesn't feel right, take a step back. Ask yourself, am I going along with this because I believe in it, or because I don't want to stand out? And if it's the latter, remember this. The world needs more people who are willing to stand out, to question, and to lead. Because true courage isn't about rejecting the group. It's about making sure the group is moving in the right direction. And when you do that, you're not just resisting evil, you're creating change. Let's take this a step further and talk about the systems we're all part of. Because here's the truth. It's not just individuals or groups that influence us. It's the larger structures we operate within. These systems, whether they're schools, workplaces, governments, or entire societies, shape our behavior in ways we don't always realize. And when those systems are flawed, they create what Zimbardo calls bad barrels, environments that foster harmful behavior. Think about it. In a toxic workplace where cutting corners or blaming others is rewarded, even good, honest employees might feel pressured to play along. Why? Because the system encourages it. It's not that these people are inherently bad, it's that they're responding to the rules of the environment they're in. And here's the kicker. When no one challenges that system, it just keeps going, getting worse over time. Now, let me give you a real-world example. In the Abu Ghraib prison scandal, soldiers were placed in an environment where dehumanization was baked into the system. The lack of oversight, the harsh conditions, the us versus them mentality. All of it created a perfect storm where cruelty became normalized. These weren't monsters. They were regular people who got swept up in a system that made harmful actions seem acceptable. But here's the thing. Bad systems don't just appear out of nowhere. They're built, piece by piece, often by small, seemingly harmless decisions. A lack of accountability here, a culture of silence there. It all adds up. And before you know it, you've got an environment where harm isn't just tolerated, it's expected. So, how do we fix this? The first step is recognizing that systems don't operate in a vacuum. They're made up of people like you and me. And that means we have the power to change them. But it starts with accountability, both at the individual level and the systemic level. Leaders, especially, have a huge role to play. They set the tone, create the rules, and decide what gets rewarded or punished. if they prioritize ethics and fairness, the system becomes healthier. But if they turn a blind eye to harmful behavior, it spreads like wildfire. And let's not forget about us, the everyday people who are part of these systems. We might not be in charge, but we still have influence. We can speak up when something feels off. We can support others who challenge harmful practices. And we can refuse to participate in behaviors that go against our values, even if it's the easier path. Now, I get it. Changing a system sounds like a massive task, and it is. But here's the good news. It doesn't have to happen all at once. Small actions add up. Every time someone questions the status quo, every time someone chooses integrity over convenience, it chips away at the bad barrel and starts to build something better. And remember, creating healthier systems isn't just about stopping harm. It's about fostering good. Imagine a workplace where collaboration and honesty are rewarded, or a school where students are taught to think critically and stand up for what's right. These are the kinds of systems that don't just prevent harm. They inspire people to be their best selves. So, the next time you find yourself in a system that feels broken, don't just accept it. Ask yourself, what can I do to make this better? Because when enough people ask that question and act on it, that's when real change happens. And honestly, isn't that the kind of world we all want to live in? A world where the systems we're part of bring out the best in us instead of the worst. Now, let's bring everything together. After all this talk about good and evil, systems, groupthink, and heroism, one big question still remains. Where do we, as individuals, fit into all of this? How do we navigate the line between good and evil, especially when that line isn't as fixed as we might think? Philip Zimbardo's work forces us to confront a hard truth. The potential for both good and evil exists within all of us. It's not about labeling people as heroes or villains. It's about understanding that our choices, the systems we're part of, and the situations we face shape who we become. That's a lot to take in, right? But here's the thing. It's not a cause for despair. It's a call to action. Because if human behavior is malleable, if systems and environments play such a huge role, then guess what? We have the power to make a difference. We can choose to be aware of the forces influencing us. We can choose to stand up to authority when it's wrong. We can choose to dismantle the systems that perpetuate harm and build better ones in their place. Let me put it this way. Imagine the line between good and evil isn't some solid wall separating us from the bad guys. Instead, it's more like a shifting boundary, one that moves depending on the choices we make every single day. It moves when we decide to speak up instead of staying silent. It moves when we choose to act with kindness instead of indifference. It moves when we create environments where fairness and accountability are the norm, not the exception. And let's not forget, this isn't just about the big, dramatic moments. It's about the small, everyday decisions that add up over time. Think about the coworker who's being treated unfairly. Do you stay silent, or do you speak up? Think about the system at your workplace or school. Do you accept it as it is, or do you look for ways to make it better? These might seem like small choices, but they ripple outward, influencing others and shaping the world we live in. And here's where it gets hopeful. Zimbardo's work shows us that just as people can be pulled toward harm, they can also be pulled toward good. Heroism isn't some unreachable ideal. It's something we can all cultivate, and it starts with awareness. Awareness of ourselves, awareness of the systems we're part of, and awareness of the impact our actions have on others. So, the big takeaway here is this. Yes, the line between good and evil is flexible. Yes, we're all capable of being influenced by the systems around us. But that doesn't mean we're powerless. On the contrary, it means we have the ability and the responsibility to shape that line in the right direction. The world doesn't need perfection. It doesn't need superheroes. It just needs more people willing to choose compassion over cruelty, courage over conformity, and integrity over convenience. And that's something every single one of us can do, one decision at a time.